August 8, 1944, near Sintho, south of Caen, Normandy. Dawn had barely burned through the mist when the ground began to tremble. In a hedgerow field, a single Tiger I tank, call sign 7, waited like a crouched predator. Its steel hide was cold to the touch, its engine idling low, almost like a beast breathing before it strikes. Inside the turret, Michael Whitman pressed his binoculars to his eyes. The glass trembled against his gloves, not from fear but from the terrible knowledge that had been growing since sunrise. In 3 hours of ferocious combat, his company of 4 Tigers had transformed this quiet French farmland into a graveyard of burning Sherman tanks. 27 Allied machines lay scattered like broken toys, their black smoke staining the horizon. Everything he had learned at Panzerschule told him they were winning. The Tiger's gun roared with unmatched precision. The armor deflected shells like raindrops. They were outnumbered but not outmatched. And yet, the sound now rising beyond the hedgerows told a different story. A low, growing thunder, dozens of tank engines, tracks grinding the soil. Whitman adjusted the focus of his Zeiss binoculars. His breath caught. A new wave of Shermans, 48 of them, was fanning out across the fields. Fresh units, untouched paint, full ammunition racks. Their commanders knew this was a numbers game. Behind them, columns of dust revealed more still on the way. His ammunition inventory had already been reported over the radio. 12 armor-piercing shells left across all 4 Tigers. Fuel reserves were critical. Reinforcements, none. No Panzer reserves, no Luftwaffe overhead, no miracle lurking behind the hedges. This was no longer a duel of tanks. This was mathematics. "They keep coming," Whitman murmured under his breath. "Mother of God, they never stop coming." To the men around him, he was a legendary commander, the Black Baron of the Armored Corps. But legends cannot outgun arithmetic. Hours earlier, his Tiger had been a symbol of terror. Now, it was just one more target waiting to be overwhelmed. Radio chatter cracked through the static. One Tiger reported engine trouble. Another whispered about dwindling rounds. The armored spearhead that had seemed unstoppable was becoming a cornered beast. Whitman scanned once more, counting, analyzing, calculating. Somewhere among the advancing Shermans, perhaps hidden behind a hedge, was a Firefly, the long-barreled variant that could pierce his Tiger's armor. The most feared tank of the war was no longer the hunter. It was the hunted. He exhaled slowly. He was not afraid to die, but he understood with soldier's clarity that this was not a battle he could win. At 12:47 p.m., over the German net, his voice came calm and clipped. "Ammunition exhausted, enemy unlimited." Minutes later, a shell found its mark. The Tiger erupted, turret blown skyward like a bottle cap from a bottle. Michael Whitman and his crew died inside their steel masterpiece. Even as historians later argued over whether the fatal shot came from a British Firefly or a Canadian gun, none of them disputed what truly killed him: overwhelming production. Whitman's death was more than the loss of a brilliant commander. It was the collapse of an illusion, the illusion that skill and engineering excellence could overcome the relentless arithmetic of American and Allied industry. This moment in a Norman field wasn't just a footnote. It was a prologue to the final chapters of a war that was no longer decided in the mud of Europe, but in the factories of Detroit and the Ruhr. This story is not about a single tank. It is about 2 opposing ideas. On one side, Germany forging a perfect blade, deadly, precise, and expensive. On the other, America building a hammer, simple, plentiful, and unstoppable. The Tiger was a masterpiece of engineering. The Sherman was a product of industry, and in modern war, masterpieces can fall beneath avalanches. Whitman's burning Tiger lay silent as the Allied columns rolled past. To the Sherman crews, he was a ghost story. To German tankers, he was a hero. To historians, he became a symbol of the moment when tactical brilliance finally met its mathematical limit. The fields of Normandy were not merely a battlefield. They were a blackboard, and on that blackboard, history wrote a simple equation. 1,347 Tigers versus 49,234 Shermans. An equation Whitman understood too late. Berlin, late 1940. Snow swept across the Reich Chancellery courtyard as the German war machine stood at its height. France had fallen in 6 weeks. The Wehrmacht was undefeated. Hitler walked the corridors with a swagger born from victory, but beneath the triumph, whispers were growing, whispers about the Soviet T-34. German officers on the Eastern Front were already filing reports of a tank that could shrug off 37mm shells and dance through mud like no Panzer III or IV could. In private briefings, Hitler was furious. His empire was built on speed and precision, and yet the Soviets had produced something both rugged and terrifying. "Then we shall build a tank," he said in early 1941, "that nothing can stop." That sentence became the seed of the Tiger. Two companies, Porsche and Henschel, were summoned. Their assignment was not to design a practical weapon. It was to create an icon. The Tiger would not be a mass-produced workhorse. It would be a sledgehammer, designed to smash through enemy lines and terrify everything in its path. The design specifications were insane by the standards of the day. A front plate of 100mm armor, sloped only slightly. A main gun capable of penetrating over 100mm at 1,000 meters. Weight exceeding 50 tons. Mobility equal to or better than lighter tanks. It was the equivalent of demanding a heavyweight boxer move like a ballerina. German engineers, brilliant and overconfident, didn't flinch. In May 1941, the prototypes rolled out. They were massive, angular, and imposing. When Hitler inspected them, he ran his hands across the thick steel plates as though touching the future. "This machine," he declared to the assembled generals, "will be worth a battalion of ordinary tanks. One Tiger shall destroy a dozen of theirs." It wasn't just rhetoric. Many German officers believed him. After all, the 88mm gun was already infamous for ripping through Allied armor in North Africa. Mounting it on a tank seemed like the final word in armored warfare. Colonel Wolfgang Thomel, after witnessing early trials, wrote in his diary, "The Tiger is not a tank, it is a fortress on tracks. But fortresses are heavy, and heavy fortresses demand fuel, transport, and time." The production philosophy behind the Tiger mirrored Germany's national character at the time: meticulous, ambitious, and inflexible. Each Tiger took around 300,000 man-hours to build. The gearbox alone contained over 1,000 precision machine components. Each armor plate was hand-fitted. Welding seams were finished like jewelry. At the Henschel plant in Kassel, foremen treated each machine like a masterpiece. Inspectors examined weld seams with calipers. A misaligned bolt could halt an entire assembly station. What they were building wasn't a tool of war, it was a luxury weapon. Meanwhile, Allied intelligence would later remark that it was a Rolls-Royce among tanks when it runs. In July 1942, the Tiger made its combat debut near Leningrad. The first impressions were mixed. Soviet shells bounced off harmlessly. German gunners destroyed T-34s at twice the range their enemies could hit back. Crews felt invincible. But reality crept in quickly. On its first deployment, 4 of 9 Tigers broke down before reaching the front, not because of enemy fire, but because their transmissions couldn't handle their own weight. German engineers responded by tightening tolerances further, not loosening them. Every problem resulted in more complexity, not less. By 1943, production ramped up, but only to a trickle. Henschel could barely produce 25 Tigers a month. Even at its peak in 1944, the number never exceeded 100. Germany had built a perfect tank for the wrong kind of war. The Tiger required a 60-ton flatbed train car for transport, special recovery vehicles when immobilized, premium high-octane fuel, skilled mechanics with months of training. Every Tiger delivered to the front was a logistical headache, but once it got there, once it was fueled, loaded, and positioned, it was a monster. Allied crews learned to fear its silhouette, that long 88mm barrel, the boxy armor that seemed to shrug off punishment. At 1,500 meters, it could destroy a Sherman with a single shot. At 2,000, it could still punch through. Its presence could halt entire battalions. Yet while German tankers grew attached to their steel giants, Allied intelligence analysts ran the numbers. They weren't impressed by the roar of the Tiger. They were counting how few there were. 1,347. That was the total number of Tigers produced between 1942 and 1945. In the same span, the United States would build 49,234 Shermans. The Tiger might win every duel, but the duel itself was a luxury Germany could no longer afford. A veteran Tiger commander once said, years later, "We felt like knights in shining armor, but the war was no longer fought by knights." That sentiment encapsulates the tragedy of the Tiger. It was designed for a war of heroes, but it fought in a war of factories. Its birth was glorious. Its fate was already written. In the spring of 1940, as Europe burned and Nazi banners hung over Paris, the United States stood at a crossroads. The country was not yet in the war, but the writing was on the wall. Hitler's armies were advancing like a machine. Britain was fighting for survival. Roosevelt knew America could not remain a bystander forever. On May 28, 1940, President Franklin D. Roosevelt picked up the phone and called a man who didn't wear a uniform. His name was William Knudsen, the former president of General Motors, a titan of American industry. "Bill," Roosevelt said, "I want you to come to Washington. We need to build planes. We need to build tanks, a lot of them." Knudsen's reply was simple, almost too simple for the military brass to understand. "Mr. President, I can't give you the best tanks in the world, but I can give you more than anyone else can." That sentence would become the backbone of America's wartime production philosophy. The U.S. Army at the time was small and under-equipped. It had tanks, but none ready for global war. Knudsen didn't care. He wasn't trying to design a masterpiece. He was trying to build something you could produce by the tens of thousands, something a kid from Iowa could learn to fix with a wrench and a manual. And so, the M4 Sherman was born not from military genius, but from industrial logic. At Aberdeen Proving Ground, engineers sat around drafting tables and stripped every idea down to its simplest form. Could the armor be welded instead of bolted? Yes. Could the turret ring be wide enough to upgrade the gun later? Yes. Could the suspension be swapped without special tools? Yes. The motto became, build it simple, build it fast, build it everywhere. By early 1941, the United States hadn't fired a single shot in the war, but its factories were already humming like an orchestra. The Detroit Tank Arsenal, built by Chrysler in record time, became the beating heart of the Sherman program. It wasn't a workshop like Henschel in Germany. It was a cathedral of production. The numbers were staggering. The plant spanned 1.25 million square feet. A new tank could roll off the line every 4 hours. Women, farmers, and auto workers stood side by side, welding steel and assembling engines. Rosie the Riveter became the face of this revolution. She wasn't a trained engineer. She didn't need to be. The system was built so that anyone could contribute to the war effort. The American approach to war was industrialized flexibility. The Sherman tank was designed to be manufactured in multiple plants, with interchangeable parts, using existing automotive supply chains. Where the Tiger required master craftsmen, the Sherman required a blueprint and a factory. Where the Tiger was handmade, the Sherman was stamped out like car parts. This was a profound shift. War was no longer about who had the smartest generals or bravest soldiers. It was about who could build faster, replace faster, and keep fighting longer. The Sherman was not perfect. It wasn't even the best tank on paper. Its 75mm gun struggled against heavy German armor. Its armor was thinner. Its silhouette was tall. Crews often called it the Ronson, like the lighter, because it lit up every time it was hit. But that nickname tells only half the story. For every Sherman that burned, another waited at a depot, and another behind that, and another being welded in Detroit. By the time the Tiger rolled onto the battlefield, America had already accepted losses as part of the math. American officers understood something that Germany never fully embraced. A tank isn't just a weapon, it's a consumable, like ammunition, like fuel, like boots. A Sherman could be lost and replaced without derailing a campaign. A Tiger lost was a strategic setback. At its peak, U.S. factories built nearly 2,000 Shermans per month. Germany never managed more than 100 Tigers in its best month. One side built marvels, the other built a flood. This flood didn't just equip American units. Through Lend-Lease, Shermans were shipped across the globe. To Britain, where they fought at El Alamein and in Normandy. To the Soviet Union, where they joined T-34s in crushing German lines. To Free French forces, who rolled them through Paris in liberation. Wherever the Allies advanced, Shermans were there, like an industrial echo of Roosevelt's promise, the arsenal of democracy. Knudsen once toured the Detroit plant with Roosevelt in 1942. As they watched dozens of tanks move down the assembly line, The president smiled and said, "Bill, this is how we'll win." It wasn't arrogance, it was clarity. The Tiger may have been the most feared tank on the battlefield, but the Sherman was the most present. And in modern war, presence is power. In the middle of Europe, on the banks of the Fulda River, stood the Henschel and Sohn factory, an industrial giant of the German war effort. But walking through its gates in 1943 didn't feel like entering a modern factory. It felt like stepping into a cathedral of steel craftsmanship. The men who worked there were not anonymous laborers. They were guild-level specialists, welders, machinists, toolmakers who treated their work with the reverence of artisans building a masterpiece. Every Tiger tank was a labor of weeks, sometimes months. No shortcuts, no rushed hands. Foremen inspected every seam with calipers. Welders ground their joints smooth like sculptors finishing marble. If a gearbox part didn't fit perfectly, the whole process halted until it did. Every tank left the factory with its own subtle fingerprint. Each Tiger was unique. Across the Atlantic in Michigan, a completely different world existed. The Detroit tank arsenal was not a cathedral. It was a river of steel. Inside, the noise was deafening, conveyor belts clanking, welding torches hissing, riveters hammering rhythmically like the heartbeat of war. Tanks didn't sit on the floor here, they moved. They glided down lines, from chassis assembly to turret installation to final inspection, like automobiles in a Ford plant. Rosie the riveter and thousands like her, young women, farmers, factory hands, wore goggles and coveralls, and became part of an enormous, well-oiled machine. Their goal was not to craft a masterpiece. Their goal was to finish the next one. This contrast was more than aesthetic, it was philosophical. Germany's industrial model was centralized, technically brilliant, but rigid. Skilled labor was concentrated. Factories were vulnerable to bombing. Tolerances were too tight to permit shortcuts. A missing part could hold up production for days. America's model was decentralized and flexible. Chrysler, Ford, Fisher-Body, and even locomotive companies built Shermans. If one factory slowed down, another picked up the slack. If a part ran out, another supplier stepped in. It was industry as a network, not a single point of failure. One system built tanks like works of art. The other built tanks like products on an assembly line. In Germany, tank production required more than just steel. It demanded a web of rare resources, high-grade steel alloys, precision-machined gears, skilled mechanics. A single Tiger transmission had over 1,000 parts, many requiring tight tolerances only a handful of plants could produce. In the U.S., the Sherman was built with existing automotive components. Standardization was its superpower. Engines came from Continental, transmissions from Detroit Gear, tracks from multiple suppliers. Almost every part could be swapped, repaired, or replaced in the field with minimal fuss. A Tiger was born in one place, a Sherman was born in many. The difference extended to labor as well. Germany was running out of skilled workers by 1943. Bombing campaigns and frontline drafts had stripped factories of manpower. Henschel filled gaps with forced labor, but complex machines demanded skilled hands. Quality remained high, but output remained painfully low. In America, production wasn't just sustained, it expanded. Women entered the workforce by the millions. Immigrants, farmers, and factory workers found themselves side by side on the line. Training programs turned novices into competent welders in weeks. Rosie the Riveter wasn't a propaganda slogan, she was a production revolution. Then came the air raids. Allied bombers targeted German production relentlessly. Kassel, home of the Tiger factory, was hit hard. Every bomb that fell didn't just damage buildings, it fractured the fragile, centralized production structure of the Tiger program. Meanwhile, Detroit's factories ran around the clock, untouched by war. Supply lines stretched but held. The U.S. could lose hundreds of tanks and replace them before Germany could finish building a dozen. This divergence created two types of armies. The German panzer divisions fielded exquisite machines, but in tiny numbers. When Tigers arrived, their presence was felt like a hammer blow, but when they were lost, they could not be quickly replaced. Every destroyed Tiger was a wound that bled resources and time. The American armored divisions didn't depend on individual tanks. Their strength came from volume and continuity. A destroyed Sherman was not a tragedy, it was an expected cost. Supply lines ensured the next tank rolled off the boat and into battle almost immediately. Where Germany relied on brilliance, America relied on momentum. A German engineer once said in 1944, Our tigers are perfect, but war does not care for perfect. War only cares for enough. It was a quiet admission of a truth already written in the smoke of bombed factories and the roar of assembly lines. By the end of 1944, Germany had managed to produce just over 1,300 tigers. America, using a distributed network of factories, had produced over 40,000 Shermans, and the curve was still rising. Each tiger was a story, each Sherman was a statistic. And in total war, statistics beat stories. At Fort Knox, Kentucky, the early morning sun gleamed on endless rows of olive-green Sherman tanks. They stood not as rare war machines but as tools lined up like farm equipment waiting for work. For young American recruits arriving straight from small towns and cities across the country, these tanks weren't intimidating monsters. They were machines to be learned, operated, broken, and repaired. Private Clarence Smoyer, who would later fight through Europe as a gunner, remembered the first time he climbed into a Sherman. I didn't grow up around tanks, but I grew up around tractors. That engine behind me didn't scare me, it just felt like a bigger John Deere. This was the genius of the Sherman program. It was built to be taught, not to elite soldiers, not to factory-trained specialists, but to ordinary Americans with a few weeks of training and a lot of grit. Training camps across the U.S. were flush with equipment. Hundreds of tanks were assigned to training units alone. Recruits practiced driving over obstacle courses, repairing broken transmissions, replacing tracks, and loading shells. They were encouraged to push the machines to failure because the Army wanted them to understand the tank inside and out. When a gearbox snapped, it was replaced in hours. When a gun jammed, there were spare barrels. A tank wasn't sacred, it was a piece of equipment meant to be used up. American armored doctrine evolved around this principle. Simplicity enables training, and training enables scale. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, German recruits were experiencing something entirely different. By 1943, Tiger tanks were scarce even at the front, let alone in training facilities. Many German tankers trained on wooden mock-ups or early Panzer models, studying diagrams instead of touching the real thing. The Tiger was simply too precious. Every operational vehicle was needed at the front. A Tiger crew once assigned to a machine treated it like a knight might treat a prized warhorse. Commanders slept beside them. Loaders polished the breech block like a holy relic. They didn't train on Tigers, they were initiated into them. The first time I touched a real Tiger, recalled a veteran gunner years later, was the same day we went into combat. The contrast wasn't just symbolic, it was tactical reality. A Sherman crew went into battle with hundreds of hours of live training on the exact machine they'd fight in. They knew how to listen to the engine, how to clear a jammed shell, how to change a track in the mud under fire. If one crewman fell, another trained replacement could step in. The tank didn't depend on any single person's expertise. A Tiger crew was different. Each member was highly specialized. Commanders were trained for 6 months. Gunners for 4, loaders for 2. Radio operators and drivers needed technical knowledge far beyond what most recruits had. When a Tiger crew was lost, it wasn't just 5 men. It was 6 months of training and irreplaceable experience erased in an instant. On the American side, training also focused on team cohesion and flexibility. The crew wasn't just learning a machine, they were learning each other. Every Sherman crew member could perform multiple roles. Drivers could load, loaders could gun, commanders could take over any station in a pinch. This flexibility reflected the Sherman's design. It wasn't fussy, it wasn't delicate. A Sherman could limp back to the depot missing a fender or track guard and be combat-ready again in a day. Crews learned to improvise. The tank was tough, said one veteran, but the crews were tougher. If something broke, we fixed it with whatever we had. German Tiger crews, by contrast, operated elite machines that demanded elite handling. Engine failures required mechanics with deep expertise. The Maybach HL-230 engine, an advanced transmission, could seize under the wrong conditions. Recovery required specialized vehicles, and those were often unavailable. If a Tiger broke down in training, it might not return for weeks. If it broke down in battle, it might never return at all. Another key difference lay in logistics and replacement. The U.S. had a surplus of Shermans for training and reserves. If a training tank was wrecked, another rolled in. If a crew was lost, replacements came within days. Germany had no such luxury. When Tiger crews were lost, it could take months to replace them, and sometimes they were never replaced. This affected morale as much as tactics. American crews went into combat knowing they could be replaced if they fell. German Tiger crews went into combat knowing they were irreplaceable. As the war dragged on, this training gap widened. By 1944, American tankers entering combat in France had spent months behind the controls of Shermans. German tankers, often rushed to the front, might have had just weeks, sometimes only days. That difference showed up on the battlefield. When a Sherman was hit and burned, surviving crewmen could be reassigned to a new tank within a day. They fought again almost immediately. German replacements, when they came at all, often arrived without proper Tiger experience. Some units had to cannibalize broken tanks just to keep a few running. War is often imagined as a contest of courage and skill, but courage and skill need machines, and those machines require trained hands. The Tiger was a thoroughbred horse that needed an expert rider. The Sherman was a farm workhorse that anyone could ride after a few lessons. In the arithmetic of total war, the workhorse always outnumbers the thoroughbred. Colonel George S. Patton, during an inspection of a training camp, said it bluntly to a group of recruits. "You won't win this war because you're the best tankers. You'll win because there'll always be more of you and more of these damn tanks." That philosophy was cold. It was also true. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The greatest armada in history struck the beaches of Normandy. Over 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 156,000 soldiers, and behind them, rolling onto French soil in wave after wave, came thousands of Sherman tanks, the backbone of the Allied armored spearhead. For the German defenders, it was like watching the ocean itself rise up to fight them. In hedgerows, villages, and fields, the Sherman became a constant presence. Not a rare sight, not a special weapon, just another part of the Allied storm. For every one knocked out, another rumbled ashore, and another, and another. Meanwhile, the German armored response, especially in the early weeks, was thin. A few panzer divisions scattered along the front, a handful of Tigers held in reserve. In early June, only 45 operational Tigers were available to counter the invasion. This wasn't because Germany lacked courage or tactical skill. It was because by 1944, Germany was already running out of everything: fuel, spare parts, trained crews, transport. The Tiger, formidable though it was, couldn't be everywhere at once. When a Tiger company moved, bridges trembled, roads cracked, trains were required to move them any real distance. But even then, Allied fighter bombers prowled the skies. One mistake on a rail line could strand an entire platoon. In contrast, Shermans moved like water. They were light enough to cross most bridges, small enough to be transported in bulk, fast enough to redeploy quickly. An entire armored division could move overnight and appear on a different front by morning. Within 2 weeks of D-Day, more than 2,000 Shermans were ashore. Their logistics were already in place. Repair units followed behind the front line like shadows, towing wrecked vehicles, swapping engines, and sending them back into battle. This wasn't warfare by brilliance. This was warfare by logistics. The first true clash between Tigers and Shermans in Normandy came at Villers-Bocage, June 13, 1944. Michael Whitman, whose legend was forged in the East, led a surprise counterattack with a single Tiger against a column of British armor. In a matter of minutes, he knocked out over a dozen Shermans and other vehicles, causing panic and halting the advance. It was a textbook demonstration of Tiger dominance in a duel. One tank, one ace, one devastating ambush. But the battle didn't end there. The next day, more Shermans rolled forward. The destroyed vehicles were dragged away. The British line recovered. Whitman's single Tiger could not hold a village against an army that never stopped coming. The Tiger was like a lion, one British tanker later said, but even a lion can't stop a tide. Allied strategy in Normandy leaned heavily on this attrition arithmetic. Shermans advanced in groups, often flanking or swarming Tigers. Commanders didn't expect a single Sherman to win a duel against a Tiger head-on. They expected to outnumber it, overwhelm it, and keep the offensive rolling. A Tiger could kill 2, 3, or even 4 Shermans in a fight, but then a fifth would flank it. A sixth would fire from the hedgerows, and while the Tiger burned, another convoy of Shermans was already unloading at Omaha or Utah Beach. The terrain of Normandy amplified this. Bocage country, dense hedgerows, narrow lanes, neutralized the Tiger's long-range advantage. Engagements often happened at close quarters. Maneuverability and numbers became decisive. A Tiger could pivot its heavy turret slowly. Shermans could swarm from multiple angles. In these confined battlefields, speed and flexibility were often worth more than thickness of armor. Sherman units also benefited from overwhelming artillery and air support. The dreaded P-47 Thunderbolts, nicknamed Jabos by the Germans, stalked the skies. A Tiger on the move in daylight risked being spotted and destroyed from above. Many Tigers were lost not in glorious duels, but stranded on roads, bombed or strafed before they could even enter battle. Logistics told an even harsher story. For every Tiger destroyed, it might take months to replace. For every Sherman destroyed, another could be shipped and delivered in days. The Allies even stockpiled Shermans in depots just behind the lines. Tank crews knocked out in combat could receive a replacement the same week, or even the same day. The Germans could not say the same. Replacement Tigers were scarce, and fuel even scarcer. By late June, some Tiger units in Normandy had more tanks out of action due to mechanical failures than to combat. One Tiger commander wrote in his diary during the Normandy campaign, "We are lions surrounded by wolves. Each day we kill many, but their numbers never end." This wasn't romantic despair, it was arithmetic despair. Germany was fighting a war its industry could no longer sustain. By the end of the Battle of Normandy, the numbers were brutal. Approximately 1,500 Shermans had been destroyed or damaged. But over 2,200 Shermans had already arrived to replace them. Germany lost most of its available Tiger force in the region, with only a handful escaping the encirclement at Falaise. Whitman himself died in that encirclement, Tiger 7 struck by a round from a firefly. His death symbolized the shift in the war, not the triumph of superior design, but the triumph of relentless, replaceable force. The beaches of Normandy had proven the truth that every American factory worker already understood. You don't need the best machine if you can send more of them than the enemy can destroy. If Normandy was the battlefield that proved industrial arithmetic, the Eastern Front was the place where it was first forged in fire. In the summer of 1941, when Operation Barbarossa began, German tankers thundered eastward with unmatched confidence. Their Panzer IIIs and IVs sliced through Soviet defenses in weeks. But by autumn, something new rolled out of the forests and factories of the Soviet Union, a shape low to the ground, fast over mud, and terrifyingly well-armored. The T-34. German soldiers described their first encounters with stunned disbelief. Their 37mm shells bounced off the sloped armor like pebbles against a wall. Their own tanks were outgunned and outranged. The myth of German technical superiority cracked in that moment. Hitler's response was predictable. If the Soviets had built a tank that could beat the Panzers, then Germany would build something even greater. The Tiger and later the Panther were conceived in this crucible, not as tools of mass war, but as silver bullets. But the Soviet Union didn't care about silver bullets, it cared about floods. Behind the Urals, in sprawling, smoke-belching factories like Nizhny Tagil and Chelyabinsk, Stalin's industrial war machine came alive. Entire cities were dismantled from the west and reassembled east of the Volga to escape German bombers. Production didn't slow down, it exploded. Where the Tiger was handcrafted, the T-34 was stamped like a coin. By 1943, the Soviets were producing over 1,000 T-34s per month. Assembly lines were crude but efficient. Armor plates weren't polished, they were welded together with speed in mind. Paint was often applied by hand. The finish didn't matter. What mattered was quantity. A single Soviet factory could outproduce Germany's entire Tiger program several times over. And soon, American Shermans arrived through Lend-Lease to pour gasoline on the fire. More than 4,000 Shermans were shipped to the Soviet Union between 1942 and 1945. Soviet crews didn't love them as much as their rugged T-34s, but they appreciated their mechanical reliability, spare parts, and comfortable interiors. One Soviet tanker later said, "The Sherman was like a good apartment, the T-34 was a trench." This industrial flood created a front unlike anything in history. Tank battles weren't measured in dozens, they were measured in thousands. The Battle of Kursk in July 1943 became the largest tank battle the world has ever seen. Over 6,000 tanks clashed in fields so vast they seemed to swallow sound itself. The Germans brought their elite formations, Tiger battalions, Panthers, and well-trained crews. Their kill ratios were extraordinary. A single Tiger could knock out 10 or even 15 T-34s in a day. Gunners calmly picked off enemy armor at 2 kilometers. Tank aces like Kurt Nispel carved their names into history. But the T-34s just kept coming. A German gunner at Kursk later recalled, "Every time we knocked out a Soviet tank, 2 more appeared behind it. It was like trying to stop the tide with a rifle." Soviet strategy was brutally pragmatic. Their commanders knew their tanks were inferior one-on-one, so they didn't fight one-on-one. They attacked in waves, relying on numbers, mobility, and sheer will. If one unit failed, another pushed forward. If one tank burned, another rolled over its smoking carcass. Where German armor doctrine idolized precision, Soviet doctrine worshipped momentum. By late 1943, the Eastern Front had become a grinder. The Tigers performed heroically when they worked, but they were too few, too fragile, too fuel-hungry. Entire German Tiger units spent more time immobilized than fighting, waiting for spare parts or fuel that never came. A single fuel convoy delayed could mean a Tiger battalion sat useless while Soviet armor poured through the gap. Meanwhile, Soviet production increased with every passing month. Factories ran around the clock, manned by men, women, and even children. They didn't stop when bombs fell, they rebuilt while the fires still burned. And then came the Sherman convoys. In the northern ports of Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, Liberty ships arrived packed with American tanks. Each Sherman delivered meant one more operational Soviet unit ready to push west. Unlike the Tiger, Shermans arrived with spare parts, manuals, and standardized components. Soviet mechanics quickly learned to repair Shermans in the field. When one broke, another part was bolted on. No waiting weeks, no special transport. No rare alloys, just practical, relentless mechanics. German diaries from the front reveal the despair of officers facing this flood. "We destroyed 60 tanks today. They sent 70 tomorrow. The Tiger is a king, but the kingdom is drowned in peasants." Even the legendary Tiger aces began to admit what the numbers made clear. Tactical excellence couldn't save them from strategic starvation. For every Tiger, there were 30 T-34s and Shermans. By 1944, the Red Army was rolling westward like a juggernaut. Soviet tank brigades advanced through ruined cities and frozen plains, spearheaded by T-34s, supported by Shermans, and reinforced faster than the Germans could blink. The Wehrmacht's elite armored corps, the same force that had once crushed Europe in months, was being drowned under waves of steel. In this inferno, the Tiger burned brightly, but briefly. The Eastern Front didn't just consume Tigers, it proved a truth. Quantity has a quality all its own. A tank that can be built, fueled, crewed, and replaced faster will, in time, defeat the mightiest machine. By late 1944, the Tiger's most fearsome enemy wasn't the Sherman or the T-34, it was fuel. The mighty Maybach HL-230 engine that powered the Tiger drank gasoline like a thirsty beast, around 500 liters for 100 kilometers on roads, and far more in combat conditions. Germany's once vast fuel network, fed by Ploiesti oil fields and synthetic plants, was now collapsing under relentless Allied bombing. Entire Tiger companies sat silent, their engines cold, their crews idle. They weren't outgunned, they were out of gas. The Tiger's brilliance became its curse. Its engine demanded high-octane fuel, its tracks chewed through roads. Its transmission required skilled mechanics. Even when there was enough fuel to fight, getting the tank to the front became a logistical nightmare. Meanwhile, Shermans poured into Europe like a river. Their engines ran on plentiful, lower-octane gasoline. Their spare parts were standardized, and they were light enough to be transported on standard trucks and trailers. If a Sherman broke down, it was towed, fixed, and sent back to the line in days, sometimes in hours. The Tiger, if it broke, it might never come back. German mechanics faced impossible odds. Recovery vehicles capable of towing a 57-ton Tiger were rare. When a Tiger threw a track or suffered engine failure in mud or snow, crews often had no choice but to blow up their own tank to prevent capture. By 1944, more Tigers were lost to mechanical breakdown and abandonment than to Allied guns. Crews became grimly familiar with the sight of perfectly intact Tigers burning by the roadside, not from battle, but from self-destruction. "We didn't fear the enemy's shells," one German crewman later said. "We feared the sound of our engine stopping." In contrast, Allied maintenance was a symphony of coordination. Armored divisions were followed by specialized repair units. They carried spare engines, tracks, gearboxes, and trained mechanics. If a Sherman was damaged, it was rarely scrapped. It was repaired, recycled, and returned to service. The U.S. Army built maintenance into its war plan. Germany treated maintenance as an afterthought. Even more telling, Allied depots were stocked with pre-assembled parts. A tank engine could be swapped in under a day. German Tiger engines often required a return to the factory, or at least a rail yard with specialized cranes and tools that frontline units simply didn't have anymore. Fuel shortages didn't just immobilize Tigers, they paralyzed operations. German armored offensives became smaller, slower, and rarer. Panzer divisions often rationed fuel just to reposition. Many Tiger units were ordered to limit training to conserve gasoline. Crews entered battle with less driving time than ever, making them less effective in combat. In stark contrast, American tankers trained and moved without restraint. Entire Sherman columns could redeploy across France in a night, supported by massive fuel convoys and repair echelons. The U.S. built a logistics empire, Red Ball Express, convoys of trucks streaming toward the front with food, fuel, ammunition, and parts. For the Tiger, each kilometer traveled was a strategic gamble. Air power compounded the problem. By late 1944, the skies belonged entirely to the Allies. P-47 Thunderbolts, Typhoons, and Mustangs hunted anything that moved during daylight. A Tiger on the march risked being spotted and bombed before it could even fight. The Germans responded by moving at night, but that only increased mechanical wear and stretched their already fragile supply chains. A single lost fuel truck could doom an entire platoon of tanks. It's easy to admire the Tiger's battlefield prowess. When it was fueled, crewed, and maintained, it was a monster. But modern war doesn't reward occasional brilliance, it rewards sustained pressure. Shermans could be fielded in vast numbers because their logistical tail was short and flexible. Tigers required a massive, fragile tail that Germany could no longer protect or supply. And unlike Shermans, which could be abandoned and replaced without pause, every lost Tiger hurt. "Each Tiger was a jewel," said a former German officer, "and we fought a war where jewels are useless." German commanders on the Western and Eastern fronts alike sent increasingly desperate reports. 2 Tigers immobilized for lack of fuel. 4 operational but no spares. Engines overheating, request withdrawal. But withdrawals only delayed the inevitable. The Allies could afford mistakes, Germany couldn't. This wasn't just a tactical disadvantage, it was a psychological collapse. Tiger crews, once proud of commanding the most feared tank in the world, began to feel like museum curators guarding relics they could barely use. They knew the enemy could keep coming. They knew the Shermans would return faster than the Tigers could be repaired. Their courage didn't fade, but their confidence did. By the time the Ardennes offensive loomed, many Tiger units on paper looked formidable. In reality, only a fraction of those tanks could actually move. The German armored fist was turning into a clenched hand with no strength behind it. The Sherman didn't just outfight the Tiger, it outlasted it. December 1944. Snow fell over the Ardennes forest, blanketing the world in white silence. Beneath that silence, engines rumbled. The German High Command was about to launch its final great gamble, the Battle of the Bulge. For a brief moment, the world would once again witness the Tiger roar. This offensive, codenamed WWII am Rhein, was meant to break through the thin Allied lines in Belgium, split their forces, and force a negotiated peace. At the spearpoint of this last gamble stood the Tiger I and Tiger II, the heaviest, most powerful tanks the world had ever seen. The King Tiger in particular was a terrifying machine. Its 88mm KWK-43 gun could destroy a Sherman at over 2 kilometers. Its armor was thick enough to laugh off most Allied shells. On paper, it was unstoppable. But wars aren't won on paper. The offensive began on December 16, 1944, with the roar of engines and artillery. Fog and snow grounded Allied aircraft, giving German armor a rare cloak of protection. In those first few days, the Tigers and Panthers punched deep into Allied lines, their guns cutting through Shermans like a hot knife through butter. American infantry fell back. Entire units were surrounded. At crossroads and frozen villages, the Tigers advanced like medieval knights, unstoppable, cold, silent. But this wasn't 1940, and the Germans weren't fighting the French anymore. They were facing an army built on logistics. Shermans moved in platoons, companies, and battalions, not as lone dueling tanks. For every Sherman lost, another came up from behind. For every Tiger round fired, another convoy of American fuel and ammunition arrived at the front. On December 19, outside the village of St. Vith, a King Tiger ambushed an American armored column and destroyed 7 Shermans in minutes. It then tried to advance, but it ran out of fuel after 2 kilometers. The crew abandoned it, setting charges to destroy their own invincible tank. They were kings, one GI later said, but they were starving kings. While German tanks struggled forward, American logistics shifted into overdrive. The Red Ball Express, convoys of thousands of trucks, rerouted supplies day and night. Fuel depots, replacement parts, and fresh Shermans arrived in a relentless tide. The German spearhead, meanwhile, burned through its meager reserves like a bonfire in the snow. Every Tiger knocked out, by enemy fire, mechanical failure, or lack of fuel, was irreplaceable. Every Sherman knocked out was replaced within days. By Christmas, the fog lifted, the skies cleared, and with it came the Thunderbolts, Mustangs, and Typhoons, Allied fighter bombers that turned German roads into killing grounds. Supply convoys, so crucial to the offensive, were torn apart from the air. Tigers sat hidden under camouflage nets, their crews freezing in the snow, waiting for nightfall just to move a few kilometers. The offensive slowed, then it stalled. One German officer wrote in his diary, "The enemy has trucks, fuel, and planes. We have snow." Then came the Cologne duel, a scene that would live on in countless retellings. March 1945, the city lay in ruins, its cathedral towering over rubble. Down a deserted street, a lone Panther tank waited in ambush. Allied columns approached cautiously, Shermans rolling forward. The Panther struck first. A single shot tore through a Sherman, killing its crew instantly. The American column hesitated. Then from behind, a Sherman Firefly maneuvered into position. Its gun cracked once. The Panther erupted in flame. Captured on film by an army cameraman, the duel became a symbol. The hunter had become the hunted. By this stage of the war, Germany's armored divisions were a shadow of their former power. On maps, they still looked formidable. In reality, many tanks were immobile for lack of fuel. Others had no trained crews left to man them. Spare parts were non-existent. American units, by contrast, were stronger than ever. Tens of thousands of Shermans had crossed the Atlantic. Repair battalions kept the older ones running. Replacement crews were plentiful. The U.S. Army could absorb losses and keep advancing. Germany couldn't. As the Allies crossed the Rhine, the end was no longer in doubt. German commanders tried desperate ambushes, isolated counterattacks, anything to slow the advance. A Tiger could still kill. Its guns still thundered, but each engagement felt less like strategy and more like delay. One German tanker, interviewed decades later, described the feeling bluntly. "We were fighting a machine, not an army, a machine with endless parts." By April 1945, the Tiger program was a corpse still walking. Fuel deliveries were measured in liters, not barrels. Training programs collapsed. Tiger tanks were blown up by their own crews to avoid capture. Others were abandoned, their long guns pointed uselessly at the spring sky. In contrast, American and Soviet tank columns were rolling through Germany like a tide breaking against a cliff. The Tiger, once the terror of the battlefield, now lay scattered in fields, smoking, burned out, and irrelevant. The Battle of the Bulge had been Germany's last great card. And it proved once and for all that tactical brilliance cannot overcome industrial arithmetic. The war ended not with a single decisive duel, but with a mathematical inevitability. In the spring of 1945, Allied columns rumbled across the shattered landscape of Germany. The once-proud Tiger tanks lay abandoned in fields and forests, burned out, bogged down, or simply out of fuel. The Sherman, humble and unglamorous, rolled on into Berlin. For years after the war, historians would debate tactics, strategy, leadership. But on the ground, among the rusting carcasses of armored giants, the truth was plain. Most beats best. The Tiger was a masterpiece. No one denied that. Its 88mm gun was lethal at extreme ranges. Its armor was thick and unforgiving. Its silhouette struck fear in tank crews across Europe. In a one-on-one duel, few machines on Earth could stand against it. But modern war is not fought one-on-one. While Germany built 1,347 Tigers, the United States built 49,234 Shermans. the Soviet Union produced more than 57,000 T-34s. For every Tiger that rolled onto the battlefield, dozens of Allied tanks waited to meet it. In the end, this wasn't a contest of brilliance versus incompetence. It was engineering philosophy versus industrial reality. In Kassel, where the first Tigers had been painstakingly assembled, workers returned after the war to find their once prized machines scrapped or captured. Across the ocean, Sherman production lines were being shut down too, not because they were defeated, but because they had already won. A Tiger was an apex predator, magnificent, deadly, rare. A Sherman was a swarm, relentless, repairable, replaceable. The legacy of the Tiger became tangled in myth. In post-war films and books, it became a symbol of unstoppable German might. Tank aces like Michael Whitman became legendary figures. Wargamers and historians debated whether better logistics or more fuel might have changed its fate. But the numbers don't lie. A Tiger cost nearly $800,000 to produce in wartime currency. A Sherman cost $45,000. For the price of a single Tiger, the Allies could field more than 17 Shermans. And unlike the Tiger, each of those Shermans could be repaired, replaced, and kept fighting with ease. The psychological legacy was just as powerful. Allied crews both feared and pitied the Tiger. Its presence on the battlefield was unmistakable, but also increasingly futile. Veterans remembered the sound of its engine, the punch of its gun, the way commanders whispered its name over the radio. But they also remembered how rarely it appeared, and how quickly the tide swallowed it when it did. "When we saw a Tiger," one American tanker said, "we knew we might lose a few, but we also knew they'd run out before we did." The Tiger's DNA did not disappear. Its engineering influenced post-war designs like the Leopard and other NATO heavy tanks. Its reputation shaped armored doctrine for decades. It proved what a tank could achieve in a duel, but also what it could never achieve alone. The Sherman, by contrast, became the quiet ancestor of an entirely different philosophy, one that valued logistics, standardization, and adaptability over raw power. The same philosophy that shaped the Patton series, the Centurion, and ultimately the M1 Abrams. The Sherman showed the world that in modern mechanized warfare, industrial scale is the ultimate weapon. Soviet designers learned similar lessons. Their post-war tanks like the T-54-55 embraced the same principles: ease of production, simple mechanics, fast deployment. These tanks would go on to dominate conflicts for half a century, not because they were invincible, but because they were everywhere. Germany had built the perfect sword. The Allies had built a forge. At the war's end, Allied teams captured Tigers intact. They tested them at proving grounds in Britain and the US. The reports were consistent. Exceptional firepower. Excellent armor. Impractical for sustained operations. Maintenance nightmare. The Tiger had terrified armies, but it had never stood a chance against a world that could outproduce it 20-fold. On May 8, 1945, the guns fell silent. Hitler was dead, Berlin had fallen, and in tank depots across Europe, rows of Shermans stood like a silent army that had simply outlasted everything thrown at it. The Tiger, the king of beasts, lay rusting in the mud. Numbers tell the story best. Tigers built 1,347. Panthers approximately 6,000. Shermans 49,234. T-34s 57,000 plus. The Tiger could kill 5 Shermans in battle, but the Allies could replace 6. That's the arithmetic of victory. Michael Whitman, once the face of Tiger supremacy, died in Normandy beneath a sky filled with Shermans. His death became a symbol, not of German failure, but of a changing world, one where the individual hero was no match for the machine of war. "In the end," said an American tank commander years later, "the Tiger was history's most dangerous dinosaur, but we were the meteor." The Tiger versus Sherman debate still stirs hearts and minds. Enthusiasts admire the engineering genius, the courage of the crews, the mythic duels. But beyond the romance of steel and fire lies a simple truth. Quantity is a weapon, logistics is strategy, industry wins wars. And so the Tiger fell, not in glory, but in mathematical defeat.